Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actual insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have an awesome guest with us. Her name is Valerie Rubin. She is a relationship and anxiety therapist who helps people feel insecure or anxious in relationships learn how to feel safe, grounded, and confident from within. Her work blends somatic therapy, inner child healing, and nervous system regulation to support people in breaking old patterns and become a match for healthy and secure love in their life. And so, without further ado, Valerie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for the warm welcome, Chris. I'm so freaking overjoyed to be here today.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And for all the listeners, by the way, I was on Valerie's podcast about 3 months ago, and it
Mm.
was an awesome episode. It was one of my favorites that I recorded. And so I'm very grateful to have Valerie on the show today to share with you guys how she helps people go through anxiety and learn how to heal from that. Because I think in today's world, with a very fast-paced, instant gratification lifestyle that many of us live, anxiety comes creeping up out of nowhere and generally is a part of our everyday life.
hmm
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so excited to dive deeper today.
Yeah. So, Valerie, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got
Yeah.
into this world of coaching and helping people through anxiety.
Yeah, so this is such a great question. It really came from my own pain. I struggled with chronic debilitating anxiety and chronic pain. So I was in my early 20s, and for 6 years, I had chronic pain. It started as chronic headaches, neck pain, IBS, adrenal fatigue, just a whole slew of other issues. And it was like I was 22 years old living in a 90-year-old's body. And every doctor I would go to, I tried everything. Talk therapy, I tried medication, I tried meditation, yoga, exercise, diet changes, like literally everything, and nothing was touching the pain. Nothing made it go away. I did all the doctor routes. They really were not helpful. They just said, there's no medical reason why you're in this pain. And I'm like, I'm so young. Why am I living in this pain? And then I discovered rapid transformational therapy, which is a form of hypnotherapy that really helped me get to the root of why I was so anxious. And for me, it was really coming down to these deep subconscious beliefs that I held about myself and all these suppressed emotions that were trapped in my body. And so then I discovered somatic therapy, and that's really how I got into it. As soon as I learned about somatic therapy, I really dropped my plan to be a doctor and get my PhD, and I decided to open my business and train as a hypnotherapist and somatic therapist. And it's been a very wild journey, and now I live with zero chronic pain. The anxiety I experience is very manageable, and it's just like so deeply fulfilling. And I really learned that a lot of our pain, whether it's mental or physical, comes down to our attachment style and how we interact in our relationships, and that really comes from our dynamics with our parents. So that's really how I really came to be here, and how I've really came to be the coach that I am.
I really love that. I personally went through a lot of anxiety problems since 2018, and I've learned I use CBD to manage it a lot because it's just one of those
Mhm.
things that knocks it down and gives me a way to break through that and figure out what's triggering anxiety. But I wanted to ask you, in your experience of things, where do you think your anxiety comes from, and how does it manifest for you?
Mm. Like personally or just in general?
Oh, personally or in general? I know for many people it can be like stress at a job or stress with a relationship, or even sometimes when we go through grief and loss and trauma and people I coach, it's this wave of stepping away from who we were to who we're becoming. And it's very anxious because there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns, and we're trying to meet this new
Mm.
version of ourselves. What's it been like for you?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought grief into it. And I know that's your specialty. Honestly, anytime now that I find myself really feeling anxious, it usually is like underlying grief. And a lot of people who are anxiously attached or struggle with chronic anxiety, there's like a lot of grief that is underneath that, because it's not just about, oh, I have like stress about my job, there's a lot of work stress. It's like, okay, what are you making that mean about yourself? That, oh, if I get fired, if my business fails, then I'm not good enough, or I'm going to feel shame. Like we're always protecting ourselves from something. And that's what anxiety is here to do. It's helping you to feel safe. It's protecting you. It's just doing its job. But for me, how it manifests, it can manifest like as business anxiety. Just like worrying about my business, making sure that that's going okay. That's like, but that's just an object. Because like growing up, I learned that I get a lot of worth and praise when I'm doing well in my career. My family really values education and things like that. So that's how it can manifest for me.
I completely understand you with that, and something you said that I love is that our attachment styles can cause a lot of
Mm-hmm.
anxiety. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate a little bit about attachment styles? Because I know very little about it, but I've heard about it one
Mm.
off. Share with us a little bit about how we can identify our attachment style.
Yes. So our attachment style is a reflection of our nervous system state. So if you are anxiously attached, and some of those symptoms look like codependency, aka if my partner's safe and they are having a good day, I'm having a good day. This could look like struggles with trusting others, trusting yourself, struggles with chronic anxiety in relationships, always worrying about how the relationship is going. This could also look like jealousy, comparison, worrying that your partner is going to be interested in someone else. It's If you have an anxious attachment style, it really feels like at any moment the shoe can drop and the rug will be pulled out under from you, because most likely in your childhood you had an emotionally unavailable parent or caregiver that was very inconsistent in meeting your needs. So because they were very inconsistent, the child learned to stay hypervigilant, to feel everything that the parent is feeling in order to protect themselves from feeling that feeling of abandonment of when their parent will leave. And that's another big core wound of someone who struggles with anxious attachment or chronic anxiety in their relationships. It's feeling not enough. It's feeling like this person is going to leave and I won't be okay without them. That's essentially what that means. And then, so for avoidant attachment, it looks like it's not safe for me to depend on others. It's not safe for me to open my heart. Um, for them, closeness can feel very suffocating. Vulnerability can feel very scary. So they always keep things very surface level, because someone who is in a freeze response, aka they feel depressed, they feel shut down, they show up in that same way in relationships. And a lot of people in my community who are anxiously attached or anxious leaning, they can paint someone who's attached avoidantly attached as like an enemy, like, oh, they pulled away or they went cold, but they're really just trying to protect themselves, because growing up for them, they had parents who did not meet their needs, were neglectful. They just ultimately uh, taught the child that you cannot depend on other people. So
You know,
that's
I
like, that's two of them. I could go into the other two, which is disorganized attachment and secure, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, I think those are the two that most of us actually deal with because
Mm-hmm.
as I coach people through grief and I help people who lost their parents in many cases, and when I do hear them talk about going through that grief process, that oftentimes comes up, that inner child. I hear it all the time come up in people, and it usually is in the form of not feeling seen or not feeling heard or not feeling understood. As you talked about those attachment styles, I also thought about not feeling safe and not feeling able to express your emotions or let alone given space to understand them, what they're trying to show you. Because I think as children, sometimes we don't always get that support that we actually need to learn how to understand our emotions. And as we get older and adult, as I like to call it, where we run into big life problems like grief and loss and trauma and all those things, because we didn't really have that foundation growing up, we're kind of left on our own devices to figure out what that means to us or what kind of purpose is behind it or how we really feel about it. And we don't always know or understand how to respond to it in those moments.
Yeah, absolutely. If you experience avoidant or like anxious attachment, or you're chronically anxious in relationships and just in your life in general, you were never taught how to actually self soothe. So, of course, we're going to feel overly dependent on our partner or our romantic partner because our inner child sees them as our attachment figure, which is wild. And so they're looking for those needs to be met.
That's a good way to say that is we do look for our parents as to be that safe, soothing thing for us growing up. And I have talked to many people where that's just not been the case. And they've had
Mm-hmm.
to self-soothe themselves and figure out what that is. And I think that's why a lot of people who go through grief and loss end up really anxious and also seek alternative means to take care of things. And I've run across people with, whether it's drinking too much or drugs or whatever outlet it becomes, even addictions for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't always see those as the problem. I see it as a surface level thing covering up what's really going on. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
care too much about those things. I usually dive into what's driving that, what's behind that, what was that experience there? Because if we can core down to where that anxiety is stemming from and actually
Mm-hmm.
address it and give it a safe space, it's almost like giving somebody a breath of fresh air and taking like 1,000 pound boulder off their shoulder.
Yes, exactly. All my clients, usually at the end of each session, not always, but a lot of the time, they're like, wow, it feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I can finally breathe again. I actually start to feel relief in my body. And I'm so glad you brought up addictions because people think addictions are just drinking or drugs or social media, but a lot of it can be codependency if you're anxiously attached. Like that is another form of addiction, jumping from one relationship to the next. Especially or if you're in a toxic relationship or a trauma bond, you learn that your partner is a source of pain, but they're also your source of relief. And so that is one of the most difficult, painful addictions to break because the intermittent reinforcement, those highs and lows of the relationship, it is triggering literally the same reward pathways in your brain that are just like a drug addiction. So when you actually break up with this person, it feels like you're literally going through withdrawals. It feels like you're dying. It feels like the worst pain you've ever felt. And it's because it's literally an attachment wound. And the attachment wound gets activated or triggered at the same age when it first happened because it was suppressed. So if you are going through this breakup and you're like, wow, I feel like I need my mom. I'm literally feel like a 4-year old in a 40-year-old's body. It's because it's triggering that young part of you that never got the love that they needed.
That's a beautiful way to say that because I've caught on to I was talking to somebody going through narcissistic abuse not too long ago, and I was talking to them that going zero contact is really the best way for you to break that thing and then get away from it. And I said, sadly, that's just the beginning of it because you've got to give yourself
Yes.
space and time to rewire your brain into how do you think, how do you feel, how do you believe,
Mm-hmm.
get in that space is what you need to recollect yourself and relearn to love yourself. um, and that's really hard for a lot of people because there's
Mm-hmm.
always a trauma bond there um, of this complex of being like, well, am I being too rash about this, am I being too harsh with this? But then when they go back, they're like, oh my god, I'm glad I got away from that, I want to run away from it, and they end up in that ping pong situation. Is what I've seen. And I try to tell people it's very normal and it's okay to do that. But I try to get people to actually acknowledge it and see it for themselves because that's where they have the power to really step back into themselves and make that better decision for how they want to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially though it no contact is usually fantastic and fabulous. And the nuance is just like if you were to take alcohol away from someone who's like an alcoholic and they're drinking every day, we want to start to modify it. So maybe you're not having 5 drinks a day. Maybe we start to go down to 4 and then 3 and then 2 and then 1 and then we're done. right? It's really the same with a trauma bond, because if you don't have that safety within yourself, you haven't cultivated how to ground yourself, how to feel safe, how to process your own emotions, you are unconsciously dependent on the narcissist to soothe that within you, to fulfill that. So when you're almost taking that away, it's like taking a child away from their parent. They feel like they're dying. So we start with modified contact with some of my clients who've struggled with narcissistic abuse. And then they feel safer to eventually go no contact completely.
So I wanted to ask you about the grief side of that because
Mm-hmm.
I mean I talk about grief all day long in many different
Mm-hmm.
aspects of life, but grief does bring up a lot of anxiety for people, and that can
Mm-hmm.
be in a narcissist relationship. That's grief over the relationship you thought you had or you wanted,
Mm-hmm.
but was never
Mm-hmm.
actually there to begin with. If you
Mm-hmm.
lose a parent or you lose a child, for example, like me, your anxiety comes from this place of the life I thought I was supposed to have or supposed to be living is now gone. And now I have to figure
Mm-hmm.
out what this new life looks like for me. You know, how do
Mm-hmm.
you help people walk through figuring out where that anxiety comes from?
So I first start, okay, so with finding out where the anxiety comes from, I first start all my clients on something called a vagus toning routine. So when we've experienced chronic stress or trauma, or we've gone through big grief, what ends up happening is we have a nerve in our body called the vagus nerve. This nerve tells our brain whether or not we are in fight or flight. And so when we've experienced chronic stress, trauma, or grief, it stops working as efficiently. So it gets stuck on. So then we're chronically anxious because our vagus nerve is not functioning properly. So I first start clients with vagus stimulation exercises. This helps to stimulate the vagus nerve so that you actually start to feel calm. And after a few weeks, it feels like you're literally like taking a medication. Like it feels like you're a lot more calmer. It's finally able to switch off, and then you're able to have a stressor and come back down to baseline, come back into feeling calmer and more regulated, into surrender. And so I start clients off with that. And then I also teach them how to regulate their nervous system and process their emotions. What does that even mean? When I say regulate your nervous system, we have four states of our nervous system. We have fight, which is that anger response, flight, which is that anxious response, what we're talking about, freeze, which is like depression, and then fawning, which is people pleasing. And so each state of the nervous system requires different tools. A lot of people will say, oh, if you're depressed, just meditate. But like if you're depressed, you have zero energy, especially if you're listening to this and you've gone through grief. The last thing you want to do is meditate. You can't even get off the couch, you can't get out of bed. So we start with mobilizing, aka bringing more energy through specific nervous system tools for the freeze response. And yeah, so all in all, I give specific customized tools for each nervous system response for clients and teaching them how to actually feel safe in their body, especially if you've had big grief in your life, you've experienced trauma, you've learned to disconnect from your body and go up here in your mind. So that's where a lot of the anxiety is stuck. So when we actually notice, hey, I'm feeling these sensations here in my chest, I'm noticing this here, we start to feel safe with our internal experience, and then we can actually feel grounded and safer in our body, which is what we all want at the end of the day. So I start clients off with that before we even do deep processing work to make sure that they actually feel safe and good in their body. And then that's where somatic therapy comes in. I do IFS, somatic IFS, as well as brain spotting. So IFS, like we talked about, addictions, drinking, trauma bonds, those are all protector parts from feeling sadness. I'm not important. I'm not enough. That young part of you. So we have that young part of you that's it's just trying to survive and keep connection to our parents. If if we are trying to not feel that younger part of us, we don't want to feel that pain, so we go into having managers. This could look like feeling chronic anxiety. This could look like drinking. This could look like overworking, overgiving, people pleasing, perfectionism. And then we have firefighters. So this looks like binge eating, suicide ideations, panic attacks, and that helps to almost like bring out the pain the quickest, in a sense. It's bringing out, it's helping to soothe that young part of you the fastest. So that's really what I help clients with, is mapping out these protector parts and seeing what need it's meeting, and then healing that younger version of you that felt it needed to have this drinking pattern or it needed to have this anxiety in order to feel safe. And then with brain spotting, I love brain spotting for grief because it's giving your body, what it's doing is with brain spotting, you're locating where those trauma memories are stored and helps you to process them and release them. So if you are feeling a lot of grief and you notice a lot of grief in your heart, where you look affects how your nervous system feels. So, okay, you're thinking about your son, for example, Chris, and you feel that grief. I'll first have clients identify, where is that grief in your body? It's in my heart. What sensations are in your heart? Heaviness. And then I feel sadness. Okay, and then looking around the room from the left to the right, finding a spot that you notice that grief more. And that's helping to actually give that wound space to heal, and sensations, emotions, memories can come up, and it's there to process it all and just really process that heartbreak underneath, your mom not coming back or your son passing away, etc. It's so fucking powerful. Clients will tell me, finally have a sense of relief. I can breathe again. People even feel more safe and connected with their loved ones who have crossed over. It's extremely, extremely beautiful and powerful.
You know, I love watching people have those moments. It's such a beautiful
Mm-hmm.
thing. My I don't do things quite
Mm-hmm.
to that depth that you go to, but I have those. I hold space for people in many ways, and when I see them just get all that out, just dump it all out on the table, and they finally get all that out of their minds, and I just see the shoulders fall. I see the calmness come over. It's just an amazing thing to watch. And that's where I think that going through grief and going through trauma, you know, you really do need to work with somebody in many ways, you know, whether that's a coach or a therapist or, you know, hell, even a good friend that knows how to listen and just be there for you. That's really where you can actually get that stuff processed. Because I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, you know, I was guilty of it going through a lot of my losses, would get stuck in my brain because you've got so many thoughts going all at once. And you know, for me, anxiety would always come when I had a massive flood, is what I call it, of just constant thought, and my brain would be almost like a Tour de France biker's foot moving
Mm-hmm.
like 900,000 miles an hour. That's what my brain would feel like. And at a
Yeah.
certain point, I was just like, "This has got to stop. It's too much." Like,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Absolutely. And I totally hear where you're coming from. That's definitely how my mind has been in the past. And when our mind is like going 1,000 miles an hour, it's a, a symptom of the dysregulation in our body. So that's why just talking about your grief or just talking about your trauma isn't going to heal the root of that. And it's not going to actually soothe that internal distress.
Well, that's what I think is so important is that many people don't realize when they go through grief that it's may not be the one situation that comes up for you in
Mm-hmm.
that moment, whether that's, you know, losing a child like me or losing a family member or losing a pet, for example. It's
Mm-hmm.
not always that one thing that happens in that moment, but sometimes that brings out 10, 15, 20 years of things. It might even bring up,
Yes.
you know, if you got bullied as a kid in school, it might bring that stuff up. It might bring up the time your boss was a jerk and fired you, that kind of thing. It'll bring all that stuff to the surface, all in that one
Mhm.
moment. And so you're never really
Mhm.
dealing truly with just this one thing that happened. It's like a freight train behind it that you just never gave space for it to come up.
Mhm. Exactly. I couldn't have described it better. That's exactly how it feels.
Yeah, and I try to tell people too, by the way, because they say, "Oh, it's a lot," and I didn't mean to share all this. And I go, "That's part of the journey, man. You
Mhm.
gotta
It
just let
is.
that thing get itself out." Because you know, as a lot of times as kids, you know, I don't know if you grew up this way or not, but you know, my upbringing, I got told all the time, children were to be seen and not heard. that
Mhm.
builds a silence mentality. And when you go through anything that involves emotions, which is pretty much
Mhm.
everything in life, you're taught to
Mhm.
suppress all the time and push down all the time. And I've always told people when you suppress and control emotions, you're missing all those messages and they will find a way to pop out somewhere. And it's not going to be in the good way when it does. Yeah.
Agreed. 100%. 100%. Yeah, and that definitely was my journey. I myself had a narcissistic father. And so I learned, and also like I have an autistic brother, and so there was just a lot of chaos all the time. So I learned to be small. I learned to suppress because I also was shamed for a lot of the emotions I had growing up. Or they
Mm.
would, like, my mother would want to fix it right away without actually learning how to soothe me and validate me. She just didn't know. She was doing the best she could, but just a lot of people are uneducated around that. And so that can lead to big attachment trauma, which causes a lot of anxiety, right? Because it's a lot of pressure, constantly pushing it all down and suppressing it. Like that's really a lot of what anxiety is, and that's where I have clients start is do a processing emotions meditation, and I show them how to do it through the body every single day because that's going to help you to process the stored stuck energy that's showing up as anxiety every day for you.
And I wanted to ask you since you brought that up because shame is something I've dealt with a lot in my life, and I'm still learning to heal through that in many ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Shame. I try to tell people in grief land that blaming, shaming, guilt, stuff like that is very, very low vibrational energy, and it also, by the way, is not going to help you heal. Believe it or not, it's not going to help you. It's something that will keep you stuck and trapped in patterns that will just constantly hold you back or cause problems. And so where I'm going with this is I wanted to ask you, growing up in that environment where you learn to be small and live with shame, and those are hard things to deal with, very, very hard. What were some outlets and some ways that you learned to work through those?
Um, as a child, I think it was just all very internalized. Like every child that is born, you are born feeling secure, worthy, deserving, feeling deserving of your needs being met, feeling wanted. We've just had conditioning and experiences and traumas that have told us the opposite. So for me, like I don't really think I had outlets like growing up, but now it's more like somatic therapy, being around safe people. For me, also like my own podcast and like even being on your podcast and being on lots of other people's podcasts really has helped me dissolve a lot of that shame and learning that it's just not true. And it's a way that I learned to protect myself. A lot of clients will self blame themselves that, oh, why did this person leave? It must be because of me. I did something wrong because a child cannot just walk away from their parent, but they can self blame and learn that hey, it's there's something must be wrong with me. Because if you look at your parent and you're like they're a bad parent, your psyche would break. You would not feel okay knowing that your parent is a bad parent. To survive childhood, we blame ourselves unconsciously to keep that connection and attachment to our caregiver.
I just think that sets us up for failure in so many ways in life when we
It
do that.
does. It does. Absolutely. It stops you from reaching your potential for sure and having healthy relationships and having a healthy sense of self.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges I've noticed with a lot of people that I talk to who have anxiety or go through
Mm-hmm.
shame and guilt and blame, is that they don't realize their own gifts and their own power within themselves. And I
Mm-hmm.
certainly went through that a lot. And I'll say if I hadn't lost my son, I wouldn't be here doing a podcast and writing a book and all these fun things. But that was one of those big moments of life where I think it was a big opportunity to step into your power. And so
Mm-hmm.
I try to share with people, so I know we talked a lot about inner child work today, which I love, by the way, is really going back to that place and figuring out, what was that moment of childhood? Because there's usually one there. And I know you grew up
Mm-hmm.
with a narcissistic father and a lot of chaos
Mm-hmm.
going on. Sometimes there's one moment of life in that childhood memory, somewhere between 5 and 15 years old, somewhere in there, that was a big one that stood out, and it never got resolved or it never got the peace and safety you were looking for. Did you have a moment like that growing up that you've looked back on as you've done somatic healing and other forms?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this is such a great question, and I love how you phrased it. For me, it was actually when I was 4. I remember very vividly. I was like, I think we were at like a funeral or something. I was 4 years old and I was in this bunk bed and I was crying, waiting for my mom to come pick me up to get me. And she just didn't. And I remember carrying my blanket, crying, looking for her all around this house. So that was like really big. And for me, it was like not feeling safe, not feeling good enough. And years ago, I myself was stuck in a trauma bond and toxic relationship. And when we broke up, I had this huge craving for him, even though I consciously knew I don't want this person back in my life. He's not good for me. I still had this craving to connect with him. So, as I connected with this craving through my body, through brain spotting, through the process I give my clients, it literally linked and connected. It was the same feeling. It was that 4 year old self looking for that soothing, looking for my mother, but it was manifesting as this guy. So it's very powerful when you can trace back those memories and sensations and really heal that through the body.
That's really a powerful example you just shared because that's what, I've always said too with my clients when they have a meltdown of any kind, just getting that emotion out. And I try to remind them because I learned this from a coach that I was working with. Um, Oftentimes that meltdown we have when we're 30, 40, 50 years old, it's our little kid self back here that didn't get that safe, secure feeling that we needed. And that's the one coming out in the moment right now. It's not actually us, but it's this small child back here.
Yes, that advice, I learned that as well. That like any quote, I'm putting this in quotes, any quote, big emotional reaction we have to something isn't coming from our current day circumstances. It's coming from that young version of you. And so once I learned that, it really helped me to de-shame the emotions that I've experienced with things that have happened in my life. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I feel so anxious, it's not a big deal. It is to that young version of you. And there's nothing wrong with you. You're very human for feeling these big reactions because that's showing that, hey, I'm learning to build safety with these suppressed parts of myself.
I love that. And I wanted to ask you, growing up with a narcissistic parent it's hard. It's very, very
Mm-hmm.
difficult. I went through that with my mother-in-law as a narcissist, and it's a
Mm,
very, very hard dynamic when I have a hard time describing it on a podcast, but if you're listening and you're really curious about narcissism, I'll just say there are people that move the goalposts all the time. So you never really know where you stand. You never really know what's safe. You never really know what's going to come next, or you really don't even know to trust yourself in many ways. And so you're always living in this heightened state of hypervigilance and hyper awareness all the
yes.
time, and that causes a lot of anxiety. Have you been able to maintain a relationship with your father since growing up, or has that changed a bit since you've done healing work?
Yes, that is such a great question. I feel like I've talked a little bit about this on different podcasts, but not too much. I do have a relationship still with my dad, but it's very like a part of me like doesn't want to say it, but it is strained. Years ago, when I started to first discover hypnotherapy and I was going through that, I actually went no contact with him for a year and a half, and that was one of the most painful things I've ever experienced. And so, but then his father, my grandfather, passed away, and so I saw him then and we kind of like reconvened and stopped no contact because he didn't trigger me as much. Uh, but and as I've told Chris, like off the podcast, and he's been on my podcast, and we talked a little bit about my transition here, but I moved out of Ohio and I'm now living the digital nomad lifestyle and I'm now living in Tulum, Mexico. So even like now, as I've removed myself from that environment, because I lived 45 minutes from my parents and from my dad. So, but now, like anytime he calls me, I'll even notice like my fight or flight will kick on. Because it's also just like you can't heal in the same environment that you got sick in. But also something that not enough people talk about is also the grief of the other parent who didn't protect you. Like, as I went deeper into my healing journey, it's like what was more painful almost was my mother letting the things happen and not fully protecting myself or my two siblings. So that's like a whole nother podcast in itself, but that's like a big, deep layer. It's like healing. Okay, my parent, who was the quote unquote healthier one, was actually an abuser themselves and let it happen.
I think that's hard in, narcissistic relationships, especially in parenting, is that, and I've watched it play out in my own personal life. One parent usually knuckles under to the narcissist all the time.
Yes, they're in their fawn.
And it's a very
Fawns.
hard thing to watch sometimes because you're sitting there like, hey, wake up. You have control over your life. You can do something about this. You can take action. You can do this. And when people are in that narcissistic world of things, like my in-laws, it's so they lose all their power. They lose all sense of self. And I feel terrible, by the way, for my father-in-law because he's not even a person. He's a shell of a person. And I feel so bad watching that person just act like they don't have a life and don't have a voice and an ability to be themselves. They just follow whatever the narcissist wants. And it's just so hard to watch sometimes. And I just like this little person in me screams like, take your life back. You can do this. Like, you
Yeah,
know.
it's very painful to watch because like my mom at her core, like she is a lovely person, like a beautiful person inside and out. She just has trauma that she hasn't fully faced, and it manifested in that dynamic with my father. And like she did become separated from him, and years ago, and that's when I went no contact. And then a lot of people don't talk about this. Is like she had big withdrawals from like, and she felt suicidal. She also had a few mini strokes because of all the stress from being away from him. They've also been married for decades. Like they just on August 20th, they celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary. So, at that point, I think they were together like 31 years. So for them, like it was insane. And then she went back to him a few months later. And, we all, it's just about can we heal our trauma so that we're not getting stuck in those patterns? Because if you have a fear of abandonment, if you have an abandonment wound, if that's bigger than the pain of staying in a toxic relationship or pain of staying in this relationship, the abandonment always wins. The emotions always win because you can know logically, hey, this person isn't safe for me. This person isn't right for me. But if you have an abandonment wound, the emotions override that logic every time. That is why somatic therapy is the truly like and inner child healing is truly the only way to move through it and to actually heal the root of those patterns.
So when you're working with somebody that's got fear of abandonment going
Mm-hmm.
on, what are some ways people can work through that? I know you talked a lot about somatic healing, and I feel like we could definitely talk an episode on that for sure because I got friends in that space. But what are some things that we could do? Maybe questions to ask ourselves, or some small exercises we could do to really address that inner child that we have and find a
Mm-hmm.
way to make it feel seen and heard and understood.
Great question. I actually created a free meditation to actually teach you how to do that. So I have a free EFT tapping meditation to heal that abandonment wound. So something that I teach my clients is EFT tapping. EFT tapping helps to move out that stuck energy, and so I combine that EFT tapping to release that abandonment anxiety, and then I also in that meditation um, guide clients and guide people through, okay, seeing your younger self in front of you, what did they need to hear, looking them in their eyes, showing them that they are not alone in their experience, because that's what an abandonment wound is, lacking that compassionate witness, not having that. So that's why, like, also having a coach or therapist or having practices like these where you can show your inner child, hey, I am the securely attached parent you're looking for. I'm here to meet your needs. So it's a combination of those two things. So that's one way of like making the abandonment wound smaller, but it's also like healing the wound, like the origin of it, of like when it first started, and that's where brain spotting really comes in with it. And I shared a little bit about what that looked like for me. Um, yeah, and I'm not saying that it never comes up either, especially with um, being a digital nomad, and like that can come up when I think about my parents because they're in a different country, right? So the fear of abandonment of mine can still come up, and but it's not as big, and it doesn't allow me to stay in toxic dynamics or toxic relationships. And a lot of people don't talk about this, after healing. It's like when you have raised your standards and you've healed that abandonment wound, it's become a lot smaller. You will actually start to feel repulsed by toxic relationships, by emotionally unavailable partners, etc. Because you're now not dependent on them to feel safe and worthy. You're self-sourcing that.
Well, I think I'm really glad you said that because that's a part I've always wanted to share on a podcast. I've done a lot of healing work in my own journey, and I do get triggered by narcissistic people all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I've gotten to this place where, uh, I've done the healing work I need to do, and when I do see it, I do get that really quick fight or flight situation for about 3 seconds, and then all of a sudden I go, you know what this is. You know exactly how
Mm-hmm.
this is going to play out. You can have a choice right now if you want to participate or not participate. And my favorite phrase I teach people a lot in the grief world is this phrase have to that you say all the time. If you ever saw that thing come out of your mouth, be very careful what you're saying you have to do because you don't have to participate with certain things. You don't have to respond to different things. Um, you get to take your control back. You get to make a choice for you, not everybody else. And I think that, I try to empower people with that because we're very quick and fast today with our thinking. And sometimes we find ourselves in those situations, whether it's with a narcissistic relationship or with something that's caused trauma. And we end up in our old patterns running, saying, oh, I have to do this. I have to say that. I have to be part of this. And we don't
Mm-hmm.
ever stop for a second and say, well, do I really actually have to? And,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I love catching people there sometimes because they go, oh, nobody's ever asked me that before. And I say, well, do you really want to? And they go, No. And I go,
Mm-hmm.
say that with a little more confidence because I know you don't want it. And it's
Yeah.
fun. It's fun to watch people get in that place because once they know it and they hear it in themselves, they catch it, and they start making better choices. Um, I wanted to ask you, looking back on the trauma you've gone through growing up, what is something that you would tell your little 4-year-old self or 10-year-old self when you were going through those things of shame? What would you say to that child right now with all that you've learned and all the healing work that you've come through?
That it's okay to have a hard time. It's okay to have big emotions because I learned it wasn't safe to show that. And that's literally what I was like telling myself this morning. Because, yeah, like, in just to be vulnerable here, like, my autistic brother had a seizure yesterday, and he's been having these repeated seizures, and it is scary to hear that. And to me, like, he's a few years older, but to me, he's like my baby brother. He's like 4 to 5 cognitively. So for me, it's like I even caught myself subtly, like shaming myself for even having a hard time, and I caught it and shifted it instantly. And it's like it's okay to like have a hard time. And then I was like telling my best friend and roommate, like, oh, like I'm just having a hard time, and like cried. And then she like gave me a hug, and I was like, yeah, like it's okay. And then I felt better, and it's great. So yeah, though that would be what I would tell my younger self, that it's okay to have a hard time.
I really love that. And I love that we've talked about big emotions today because I think
Mm-hmm.
people and we've all been told at some point in our life that having big emotions means we can't control ourselves or we need to
Mm-hmm.
think differently or we don't can't obsess about that or stay there. We've got to move on or let
Mm-hmm.
it go. Uh, and I really found a lot of those phrases in the grief community very hurtful because I've witnessed people have very big emotions. And to be very honest, I love people like that. Like I had somebody talking about anger one time in a coaching call, and they
Mhm.
got real angry, and they apologized, and I died laughing. I was like, "Don't apologize to me." I said, "You need to get that out." And what I love about people that have big emotions and don't shame themselves, but they give themselves space to do it, all the needs that you have will come out in that moment as you're talking,
Mhm.
as you're moving your body around, all the needs start coming out. And that's
Mhm.
where I don't ever see people that are very, very angry or very, very sad or very, very emotional. I don't see it as a problem. What I do see is
Right.
somebody communicating their needs, and it may come out very loud, but that just tells me,
Mhm.
by the way, if it comes out loud, it's not seen or heard or understood for whatever reason or never was. And so,
Yes.
why not take this moment, by the way, to shock somebody and actually give them those things? Because it takes the intensity way down. And then all of a sudden, that person goes, "Oh, that's what it feels like to be seen and heard." And
Mm.
and then it can shift their perspective a little bit. It helps them heal.
Mhm. Absolutely, it does. That's really the power of coaching or therapy or having an attuned, compassionate witness in your life because we have experienced trauma through relationships. And so we also heal by being validated, listened to, seen, and heard, like Chris is saying.
Yeah. Have you read the book Courage to be Disliked by chance?
No, but my brother has, and he was telling me about that actually. Um, no, I haven't. I haven't. I would love to read it.
It's a beautiful book written by a Japanese author, and it's a not a traditional book that you read. It's a discussion between a philosopher and a student, and
Mm.
the student always challenges the philosopher, like doesn't believe him or thinks it doesn't make sense, and they talk about interpersonal relationships throughout the whole book, and
Mm.
the philosopher's mentality is that 99% of our problems or in our life all stem from interpersonal relationships. And so
Yes.
if we don't learn how to interact the right way with certain things in those interpersonal relationships, we'll always have conflict and problem. And
Yes. Yes. That is
yeah,
why, like, attachment healing is so fucking imperative. Like, so imperative. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do for sure.
I love that. Well,
Hmm.
Valerie, it's been amazing to have you on my podcast. I'd love to have you back on again sometime because I can tell there's a lot that you know, and I think you have a lot of tools and knowledge to help people move through grief and trauma. But I just want to say today, thank you so much for sharing about attachment styles, about giving people permission to listen to big emotions. I love that, by the way, because not enough people out there are holding space for that. And I appreciate you sharing your own story and your own journey about having a narcissistic parent growing up and working through shame, because that's something that a lot of us feel shame all the time, but we walk around with it and we don't ever address it
Hmm.
really, or we just try to gloss over it and hope it works itself out. And I really appreciate you being vulnerable with that because I think that will inspire other people who are feeling shameful for whatever reason in life. Have the confidence to face that for once and really give themselves an opportunity to just be themselves and break free of that.
Hmm. Aw, thank you so much for having me on, Chris. It was super, super wonderful. I love talking about all of this, and I just loved the space that you cultivated here today.
Well, thank you. And as I wrap up my podcast, I usually ask my guests a couple questions. One of them
Yeah.
is if you know somebody going through grief or maybe somebody who feels stuck in grief, what is one thing you would share with them to help them navigate that journey just a little bit easier?
The first thing that came to my mind is like, it's okay to fall apart. You don't have to be strong. You're being strong by letting yourself grieve.
I love that you said that because that's something in my own family I struggle with certain people that they always feel like they need to be the strong person, the one that holds it
Yes.
together, the one that can be the rock. And I try to let everybody know we're all humans, we all have emotions, and you can be hard and strong for a really short period of time, but it's gonna happen at some point. So I
Hmm.
love that you're saying we don't always have to be strong. I love that.
Thank you.
And I want to say too, if anybody would like to connect with you after the podcast, where can they find you?
Yes, thank you so much. They can follow me at Heal with Val on Instagram, HEAL with Val. And I talked about on the podcast that EFT tapping meditation for healing that fear of abandonment. That's completely free in my bio on Instagram. And then I also have a meditation to help you heal abandonment anxiety. It helps you to process those emotions. And I also talked about that a little bit today in the process of that. And that's also completely free in my bio. And then also, if you want to hear more of Chris and I talking, we did a podcast on my podcast talking all about grief, relationship conflict, and it was amazing. So I highly recommend you check that out as well.
I hope they check out your podcast. That was one of my more powerful episodes I've ever recorded. And I just
Mm.
want to say too, Val, I appreciate you being vulnerable that day because we had an
Oh,
awesome little mini coaching session. And I do encourage people
yeah.
to go listen to that episode because Valerie
Oh.
was very open in that when she was going through some friendship issue that was going on. I'm trying to remember because it was months ago, but she had a powerful moment in that coaching session that we did on the
Mm-hmm.
podcast. So you guys will learn a lot from listening to that episode and watching her go through that.
Yeah, it was
So.
freaking powerful. I'm pretty sure I cried in it.
But that's the beauty of podcasting, right? We get to connect with one
Yes.
another and help each other heal.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on, Chris.
Likewise. And I just want to let everybody know if you want to connect with Valerie, I will have all of her social media links in the bio for this podcast. So when you get done listening to the episode, check the show notes and definitely reach out to her on Instagram. She's a phenomenal human being that I have met through my podcast journey, somebody I stay connected with. And I think you guys will get a lot out of her offerings on her site. And I would also encourage you guys check her out for coaching. If you have anxiety, by the way, a lot of people out there are fighting anxiety right now. It's a very hard thing to go through by yourself. There's lots of modalities to learn to work through it, but Val's got a very good skill set with somatic healing and also her approach to her mindset with anxiety. And by the way, I love that she's had it too, so she can tell you from a personal level how to
Oh
work through
yeah.
that.
Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it. Aw.
Well, I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Valerie and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from our story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you, go to empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.